Democratic Governor John Hickenlooper of Colorado is slamming Trump's response. Hickenlooper dealt with a mass shooting himself, of course, in his state in 2012 when a gunman opened fire in that movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. He said this to the New York Times, quote, "Trump cared nothing for compassion. There was no sense of dignity, and those are the things that generally a community grieving finds nourishing." Well, Governor Hickenlooper joins me now. Governor, thanks for joining us on this Father's Day.
You bet. Nice to be here.
Governor, you have particular experience with this, with the Aurora shooting. You called Trump's reaction mean-spirited, said he was seizing a political opportunity. Explain that.
Well, I mean, you're still in the very process of dealing with the tragedy. I mean, the victims in the hospitals, the family members of the victims, the whole community is going through this traumatic process, and he's patting himself on the back. I mean, it's almost unconscionable. It reflects an almost total absence of any kind of empathy or real caring about what's happened to everybody, all these people.
I have to ask you, you've, of course, dealt with this very directly. You had the shooting, you had to deal with the victims' families, etc. I, like many journalists, have covered too many of these shootings to count. I literally cannot count how many times I've been outside the scene of a shooting like we saw in Orlando last week. There's enormous frustration here, frankly, on both sides of the aisle about how our country responds to this and how our country can prevent these kinds of things. Is there something different about this shooting, do you believe, that will spark some sort of change to make this not happen, or at least less likely to happen again?
Well, I certainly hope so. Like you, I am frustrated, bewildered at the inability to come to terms with figuring out some of the restraints. Obviously, we've got to figure out how to do a better job around mental health. And the issue is, after we had Aurora, we really sat down and really examined how we were dealing with mental health. Did we need other legal changes? Our guns, you know, we switched to universal background checks. And again, maybe it wouldn't have been applicable in this case in Orlando, but creating a fabric of better regulations and making sure that, you know, people that shouldn't have these weapons of destruction don't get them.
But you know the enormous hurdles for both Republican and Democratic lawmakers to pass regulations, even if they're small and incremental. You know that groups like the NRA will jump on them. They'll attempt to get them barred from office, or lose their elections in the primary stages and elsewhere. How do individual lawmakers who, frankly, have their political careers to think about, how do they overcome that hurdle when the price, and we've seen this before, the price is so high politically?
Well, that's why this tragedy is so significant. I mean, the scale of it, the fact that it's a hate crime tied into terrorism, hopefully it can push us into a meaningful dialogue. And you know, dialogue requires listening. And so far, Mr. Trump hasn't shown the capacity really to listen. He just shouts most of the time. And I think that's our challenge. If we're really going to try and make this country safer, it's going to be all of us coming together after a tragedy of this scale and rolling up our sleeves and saying, all right, here's how we're going to get to a better place.
You heard Trump, in addition to proposing this broad Muslim ban in response to acts of terrorism, he's now spoken this morning about profiling Muslims. He says that's necessary. Do you believe that's true?
No, I think that racial and ethnic profiling, and there's various, and I don't have them in front of me, but a number of people have talked about how when you start looking at profiling, oftentimes what happens is you miss the obvious tip-offs of someone who really is going to be a terrorist or a mass killer. And that vigilance and really training our first responders in terms of what they should be looking for is probably much more useful.
When I was down in Orlando, I spoke to a lot of people, and I asked them, what do they think needs to be done, right? And I did hear people, you know, people who were warm and hospitable and thoughtful and affected by the tragedy. I did hear people who said, you know what, we got to keep the Muslims out of the country. You know, you hear that from people reflecting, and that's in effect who Donald Trump is talking to when he makes these kinds of proposals. Where you're an experienced politician, in addition to being a successful businessman, where do you think the country is on these issues right now? Do you think fear has risen so much to the top that the country is capable of taking a step like that right now, barring a whole people or profiling a whole people based purely on their faith?
Well, I'd like to think that couldn't happen in the United States. But obviously, when fear takes hold, you know, after Pearl Harbor, and we went to war with the Japanese, we incarcerated a large number of U.S. citizens who were of Japanese heritage. And I think most of us look back on that as a terrible mistake. We had a Republican governor in Colorado at the time, Ralph Carr, who really sacrificed his political career to stand up for those U.S. citizens who were of Japanese descent and said, we can't do this. And I think this is the same kind of thing. There is fear, and I understand. I feel where people are coming from in fear, but I think it's the wrong response is to make these decisions based on, you know, how someone appears or what religion they believe in.
Let me ask you a final question here, and I know you love questions like this, but your name, of course, being floated as a possible vice presidential pick for Secretary Hillary Clinton. First question is, are you being vetted for vice president?
Well, I'm not sure it's being vetted, but have talked to the Clinton campaign a number of times about trying to help them succeed. Obviously, I think this is going to be a very important presidential campaign. Maybe that turns into vetting. You know, I'm sure my focus, and I am sure Secretary Clinton's focus is not on, you know, any one person. It's on the campaign and what are the issues going to be. She's going to look for someone who can, you know, be the best partner that she can have. So I want to do, you know, regardless of who she chooses to run with, I want to do everything I can to help her succeed.
Let me ask you, if you were chosen, would you accept the call?
Well, I mean, I've got a job I love. I mean, being governor of Colorado is about as good a gig as there is. But it would be very hard to say no. If your country, if the presidential nominee came and said, you know, here's why we need you, it would be hard to say no for sure.
Governor John Hickenlooper, thanks very much, and happy Father's Day to you.
You bet. Happy Father's Day.